Tonight's story is called Age of Eden, written by Dead Air. Chapter 4. What lived below? The first time I considered leaving Project Eden was after T01 spoke. The second was after the missing personnel records. The third was after Rebecca disappeared. I never made it to a fourth. Eden made the decision for me. It happened on a Tuesday. Mason sat across from me, staring at 4 names on my monitor. Ruiz, Brooks, Patel, Moore, each marked with the same sterile lie. Transferred. He looked sick. He asked what I planned to do. I never answered because someone knocked on the door. 4 internal security officers walked in. Not the regular guards, Hans people. The kind nobody questioned, the kind that showed up when someone became inconvenient. "Dr. Whitlock," the lead officer said, calm and cold. "You need to come with us." I asked why. I asked where. He only repeated himself. The walk through Eden felt unreal. Scientists looking away. No one intervening. No one wanting to be the next name on a list. At a checkpoint, they took everything. Phone, tablet, keys, laptop, notes, every storage device, even the pen clipped to my coat. A technician scanned my badge. A red warning lit the monitor. Access terminated. He tossed it back across the table. "Keep it," the officer said. Worthless plastic as far as they knew. Nobody searched it. Nobody knew what Kenneth had taught me years before. Keep copies. Always. Inside was everything. Every interview, every deleted file, every personnel record, every classified recording. The truth survived because Hans' people thought they'd already won. The elevator ride lasted forever. Down past containment, past storage, past maintenance, past levels I didn't know existed, and then deeper still. The doors opened, and the smell hit first. Rot, dust, mold, stagnant water, old electrical fires, and underneath all of it something organic that smelled wrong. It hadn't started as a prison. Rows of abandoned workstations, dust-choked monitors, ancient servers still humming in the dark. Offices frozen mid-shift, coffee mugs, family photos furred with grime, notes scattered like everyone had simply gotten up one day and never come back. The voices started that first night. I told myself it was ventilation, the building settling, my own imagination. Until I heard a man's voice, soft and curious, directly behind me. "How old were you when your mother taught you to swim?" I turned, nothing there. Hours later, a woman's voice. "You still remember her face, don't you?" Questions only dead people should have known to ask. Questions built from childhood memories no stranger could possibly have. Then laughter. Not from any speaker, not from any hallway. Inside my own head. 3 days later, I met Ellis Warren. He sat behind a cluttered workstation surrounded by dying monitors and half-disassembled machines, decades older looking than he should have been, hair grey, eyes bloodshot, hands never quite still. I thought he was another prisoner. He was worse. He wasn't surviving. He was waiting. "You hear them too," he said, looking up. "The voices," he smiled. "The questions." Then he pointed to a dark corner, and I nearly screamed. A skeleton slumped against the wall, lab coat still buttoned, a revolver by its hand. "Dr. Harris, 3 years." He pointed to another. "Dr. Kim." Another. "Security officer." More scattered through the room like furniture. Some had killed themselves. Some had starved. Some, Ellis said, had simply stopped moving. Others had vanished entirely. The voices, he claimed, eventually took them. He pulled up corrupted files, grainy, distorted, torn apart by static. And that was how I learned Project Eden hadn't just built dinosaurs. It had built mistakes. The first image showed something Ellis called a watcher. Its body was a gaunt, near-translucent thing, ribs pressed visibly through skin stretched paper-thin, its neck rising impossibly long and thin above the frame, ending in a skull so hollowed it looked less like bone than something scooped out and left behind. Root-like tendrils hung from its spine and skull like dead vines. And in that hollow socket where an eye should have been small and reptilian, there was instead something wet, pale and unmistakably human, staring straight into the lens. "They don't hunt the way you'd think," Ellis said. "They listen, feel. Pressure, vibration, heat. A whole forest with its neck in the air, waiting to hear you breathe." Another file showed a pack, low, lean, bipedal shapes built like something assembled by a mind that had only read about anatomy secondhand. Sail-like ridges of exposed spine ran raw down their backs. Their skulls were narrow and too long, jaws hinged wider than any living things had a right to open, arms dragging low with claws that scraped whatever surface they crossed. Tile, steel, bone. Ellis called them exterminators. "They hunt in packs," he said. "They don't stop being hungry. Ever." A third file, captured underwater badly, showed something with a torso stretched thin as a drumskin, its upper skull split into two narrow prongs, like a grotesque tuning fork. Rows of needle teeth lining both, wing-like membranes unfolding from its back like a bat's. Ellis called it the Leviathan. "Nobody's ever seen all of it," he said. "We only ever see pieces. That should tell you something." Another showed something with a jagged, torn dorsal sail standing exposed on a cliff's edge, its jaw hanging open like a husk that had been hollowed from the inside. Then Ellis went pale in a way I hadn't seen yet and wouldn't stop talking about for the rest of the night. Not a creature file this time, but a shape, half-formed and constantly shifting on the corrupted feed, features sliding across its face like reflections on water. A cheekbone would surface, then dissolve. An eye would drift too far to one side and slide back. "That one talks," he whispered. "Not with its own voice. With yours." "What is it?" "We called it the Mimic." Then his hands began shaking harder than before. There was one worse. The room went silent around the word before he even said it. X00. Even saying it seemed to cost him something. He sat down hard, refusing to pull up a file, refusing to look at the monitors at all. "I don't like talking about him." "What is he?" Silence. I asked again. "He isn't an animal," Ellis finally said. "He isn't a dinosaur." A long pause. "He controls them. He tells them things. They listen." I asked what X00 looked like. Ellis stared into the dark like he expected something to be staring back. Then he said one word, "No," and wouldn't say anything else. Far above us, T01 kept asking the same question. Every day, every shift, every interview. "Where is Sarah?" The lies continued until the tablet incident. A group of researchers joking outside primary containment. One said I was probably rotting in the prison levels. Another called T01 a monster. The room went silent. T01 stopped eating, blood dripping from his jaws onto the concrete. "Where is Dr. Whitlock?" Nobody answered. He watched each of them in turn, then lowered his head and resumed eating. They thought the moment had passed. It hadn't. That night, a researcher left an observation tablet near the feeding gate. The official report called it accidental. It wasn't. T01 had engineered the moment, made them nervous, made them focus on him, and then he took it. When security recovered the tablet, someone had accessed personnel files, containment maps, maintenance routes, door schedules, security rotations, emergency override systems, and one file over and over. Dr. Sarah Whitlock. Nobody understood what he was doing. Months later, we would. That was the moment he started planning. Not an escape, a rescue. The final alarm sounded 3 nights later, deep beneath Eden. Ellis heard it first, and every trace of colour left his face. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, no." Red light bled through the underground facility. Containment failure, containment failure, containment failure. Somewhere below us, something enormous began to move. For the first time since I'd entered that prison, the voices in my head fell completely silent. Then, one final thought arrived. Not spoken, not heard, felt, pressing against the inside of my skull like a fist closing. "We are going home." Ellis collapsed backward, crying and laughing and screaming all at once. And somewhere in the deepest level of Project Eden, X00 woke up. Chapter 5. Containment Failure. The first alarm sounded at 2:17 p.m. At first, nobody panicked. Eden had thousands of alarms, most resolved before they ever became problems. But this one was different, deep, mechanical. A low metallic howl that vibrated through the walls themselves. Red emergency lights spilled beneath the prison doors, painting the corridors the colour of old blood. Ellis went rigid. "No," he whispered, standing so fast he collided with a desk of decades-old paperwork. I had never seen a grown man look that afraid. Containment failure. Sector 3. More alarms overlapped until the whole facility seemed to be screaming. 3 miles above us, Director Hahn was feeling something entirely new to him. Fear. Command was chaos. Scientists crowding monitors, engineers shouting over each other, every screen repeating "Containment override initiated." Hahn stormed the central console. "Report." A pale systems engineer looked up. "Unauthorized access to containment. Somebody initiated a facility-wide release. Cancel it." Fingers flew across the keyboard. Nothing happened. "I can't." He turned the monitor toward Hahn. A security authorization executed through the facility's master systems. One name at the top. Dr. Kenneth Voss. The room went dead silent. A dead man's credentials, live and running. "We think it started 3 days ago," the engineer said, pulling a recording. A containment tablet missing for 28 seconds, then recovered. The one taken from T01's enclosure. Every trail led back to those 28 seconds. Everything had been programmed, timed, sequenced days in advance. T01 hadn't stolen the tablet out of curiosity. He had used it. "If we force-stop the sequence," the engineer began. "What happens?" Hahn said, ice in his voice. "It activates the final stage." Somewhere deep below, the heavy mechanical clunk of massive locks releasing rolled through the dark. A chain reaction of steel doors failing one after another. The entire prison was opening. Ellis backed away from our lab door as the magnetic lock disengaged with a crack, a blast of stale air rolling in. "They opened it," he whispered. "They opened everything." It wasn't Hahn. It wasn't security. It was T01, and every door beneath Eden had opened because he wanted it to. Ellis grabbed a flashlight, hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it, and swept the beam down the corridor. Something stood at the far end, tall, motionless. watching. A watcher's gaunt, near-skeletal shape, its hollow eye catching the light and throwing it back, human and wet and hungry. Ellis killed the light. "We're leaving," he whispered, and the dark swallowed us whole. Luis Ramirez heard the screaming first. Eden had always been loud, but this was pure panic. He sprinted through the eastern containment corridor as the announcement looped endlessly overhead. People ran in every direction, injured, carrying equipment, frozen in shock. Nobody knew what had gotten out. Luis climbed a maintenance crate and shouted over the alarms, pointing the crowd toward the emergency route 4, organizing from the front the way he always did. Then they reached the next level, and the security doors stood open. All of them, silent, lit only by red emergency light dancing on metal walls. A shape stood motionless at the center of the corridor. Built like a raptor but wrong in every proportion, its spine protruding through stretched skin in jagged, exposed ridges, forearms hanging nearly to the floor, head twitching sideways in short mechanical jerks. Then another appeared, and another, 4 total, standing perfectly still. Watching, a researcher broke and ran. The movement triggered everything at once. The creatures crossed the distance faster than anyone could process, and the first man didn't have time to scream before the nearest exterminator hit him and threw him into a wall. The corridor erupted. Luis dragged a survivor into a maintenance route. Behind them, screaming, bending metal, gunfire, and finally the kind of silence that only follows death. He sealed a dozen people inside an emergency checkpoint, a young scientist crying for a friend still trapped outside. Luis thought about staying. Then he remembered his routine. Good morning, every morning, to something behind glass that used to be small enough to fit in his arms. He checked the emergency shotgun on the wall. 1 shell. Not enough. He smiled at the frightened group. The others are still down there. They begged him not to go. He unlocked the door anyway, stepped back into the dying facility, and let it close behind him. None of the survivors ever saw him again. Mason Reed had always trusted systems. Doors opened. Cameras recorded. Protocols existed for a reason. What frightened him now was understanding that Eden no longer had any. He moved fast through the Western Research Wing, past security doors torn open like paper, past offices left exactly as they'd been at the moment of evacuation. Blood smeared on the walls, drag marks leading into darker hallways. "Sarah?" Nothing answered. Then softly, from somewhere ahead, "Mason?" He froze. Rebecca's voice exactly. The same nervous tone she used reading aloud to Tio Wan. He stepped forward, then stopped. Rebecca had been missing for weeks. No footsteps, no breathing, just the voice, perfect and wrong. He backed away, and it stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt deliberate. Watching. Another voice, mine this time, calling his name with a warmth I hadn't used in that exact way with him. His blood went cold. Whatever was making these sounds didn't just copy voices. It knew things about him that only I would know. A real scream tore through the dark nearby. He ran toward it, reaching an observation corridor just in time to see a terrified scientist stumble in below, calling for Rebecca. And something unfolded from the shadows to meet him. Human at first. Then it moved, and the illusion collapsed. Its limbs were too long, its torso stretched thin, and its face wasn't one face but several, features surfacing and sinking beneath the skin, like something trying on masks that didn't fit. It spoke in Rebecca's voice. "Help me. The scientist froze. The creature closed the distance in a single motion, and the screaming lasted only a few seconds. It lifted its head, blood on its mouth, and looked straight up at Mason. It smiled with a mouth that had clearly never learned what a smile was for. Then it spoke in my voice. Mason. He ran. No footsteps followed. No pursuit at all, which was worse because it meant the mimic didn't need to chase him. It already knew his name. Project Eden had been built on a single assumption. If containment failed, the surface would stay safe. Get outside. Survive. Nobody had prepared for what came after. The first group reached the surface as the eastern evacuation gates opened. Scientists, engineers, security spilling onto the road down the mountainside, the cold air real and shocking after everything below. Someone laughed. Someone else dropped to their knees and cried. Behind them, the facility smoked from its upper levels. Somebody said, "We made it." Those were the last words he ever spoke. A shadow crossed overhead. At first it looked like a pterosaur. Wings too long, body malformed. Pale skin stretched thin over visible bone. A beak lined with needle teeth that never seemed capable of fully closing. Then it descended, and the last of the illusion fell away. Its eyes were human, watching. The flyer let out a sound that was half scream, half something closer to laughter, folded its wings and dropped. Its jaws closed around a security officer and pulled him screaming into the sky. Panic exploded. A second shape emerged from the trees, then a third. They circled and herded and separated groups with an almost playful precision, picking targets the way something practiced would. A man emptied his entire magazine into one. It barely reacted before it took him apart. Within minutes, the evacuation route was a graveyard. Overturned vehicles, abandoned gear, blood, and silence, while overhead the shapes kept circling, searching for anything still moving. There was nowhere left to run. Not underground, not inside, not outside. Project Eden wasn't collapsing. It was escaping. By the time Mason reached Central Security, Eden was already dead. The lights still worked, the alarms still screamed, but the illusion was gone. The people who'd built this place no longer controlled it. He pushed through the shattered doors into a room stained with spilled coffee and overturned workstations. The giant surveillance wall still running, displaying the collapse of Eden across 100 camera feeds. He searched for me. Nothing. Then he tried prison transfers and a hidden directory opened. Thousands of entries, every missing employee, Angela Ruiz, David Brooks, Rebecca Moore. Then, Dr. Sarah Whitlock. Active prisoner status relief hit him hard enough to hurt, followed instantly by anger. Han had buried me alive beneath his own facility. Mason pulled the prison map, found an executive elevator route, and copied everything he could before a warning flashed across the screen. Lower containment compromised. And the lights failed, came back, half the feeds reduced to static. Somewhere nearby, something massive struck a wall hard enough to shake the room. He grabbed a flashlight and ran. Toward me. "They're not escaping," Ellis said, his face slack with horror. "They're competing. Eden didn't build a containment wing. It built an ecosystem." One exterminator lifted its bloody head and looked straight at us. We ran. Branches tore at my face, roots catching my feet as the forest erupted into motion behind us. Something shrieked. The ground shook. We reached the exit just as another watcher screamed. Ellis slammed the door controls. The lights flickered as the door began to open, too slowly, while the trees parted and an exterminator stepped onto the path. Then another. They didn't charge. Their heads jerked in short, twitching movements, studying us, learning our distance, learning our fear. The gap widened enough. Ellis shoved me through and squeezed in behind me as the door began to close. An exterminator lunged. Its jaws struck the narrowing gap with a wet metallic crack, teeth scraping steel inches from Ellis's face as he fell backward. The door sealed. Claws dragged slowly down the far side for several seconds. Then silence. Ellis lay on the floor, chest heaving. "They've been down here all this time," he whispered. I finally understood. Project Eden hadn't failed because the creatures became monsters. It failed because the creatures adapted, and adaptation does not ask permission. Ellis and I reached the ocean sector 20 minutes later. The transition was abrupt, colder, wetter, heavier. Concrete gave way to rusted steel, the floor sloping down into darkness my flashlight couldn't reach the bottom of. An underground sea stretched beneath Project Eden, black water extending farther than the light could follow. Broken catwalks crossed the surface in rusted lines, flooded laboratories rising from the water like sinking ships. The surface was perfectly still. Ellis stopped dead. No, not again. "Ellis, this is a 01. He shook his head. "The Leviathan." I asked how big it was. He gave a broken laugh. "Nobody knows. We only ever saw pieces." A small, almost delicate ripple passed under the nearest catwalk, then vanished. We had no choice. The only exit was a service door 200 yards across the rusted metal. I stepped onto the catwalk. It groaned under my weight. Every step felt like an announcement. "Don't run," Ellis said, gripping the railing. "If we run, it knows we're afraid." A pause. "I think it already knows." Halfway across, the lights flickered and died, then came back on emergency power. The water had started moving, slow circles spreading around the catwalk supports. It was circling us. A voice echoed from the far end. "Sarah." I froze. Kenneth's voice. Perfect. Not similar. Perfect. The voice of a dead man who'd started all of this. "Sarah, listen to me." I couldn't move. I knew it was wrong. Grief isn't logical. More voices joined it. Rebecca, then Luis, then others dead and missing, calling from the dark all at once. Ellis raised the flashlight, the beam shaking. At first, only shadow. Then it unfolded. The mimic stepped into view, thin, wrongly proportioned, its limbs bending as if it had learned anatomy second-hand by watching her through glass. Its skin shifted constantly, a cheekbone rising and dissolving, an eye sliding too far across its face and slipping back. It was trying to become everyone at once, and succeeding at none of it. It smiled with a mouth that didn't understand smiles. "Sarah," it said in Kenneth's voice. Ellis stepped in front of me. The mimic tilted its head. "Ellis." A woman's voice now, soft and old, meaning nothing to me and clearly meaning everything to him. "Ellis, why did you leave me?" He made a sound like he'd been stabbed. The mimic stepped closer, silent on the catwalk. It wasn't copying voices anymore, it was copying wounds. Speaking to what people missed, what they regretted, what they would follow willingly into the dark. "Don't listen," Ellis whispered. The water beneath us rippled. The catwalk groaned. The mimic went still and turned toward the water, real fear crossing its shifting face. Then the ocean exploded. The Leviathan erupted from beneath the catwalk with impossible force. Steel twisting upward, bolts snapping, water filling the air. For one fraction of a second, I saw its skull clearly. Long, pale, crocodilian and skeletal, split into two narrow prongs, like something that had grown two heads and settled for neither. Rows of needle teeth flashing in the emergency light, its body continuing beneath the surface, too large to comprehend. The catwalk shattered. I hit the metal hard, my shoulder taking the impact, the badge flying from my hand. I screamed and reached for it. Ellis caught it instead. For one heartbeat, we stared at each other through the rain of black water and flashing red light, and I watched him understand. The truth, everything, all at once. The mimic climbed over the broken catwalk toward him, wearing half of Kenneth's face. The Leviathan circled below. Ellis looked at me. For the first time since I'd met him, his eyes were completely clear. "Sarah," he threw the badge. I caught it against my chest. "Run. I'm not leaving you." He smiled. Not broken, not mad, just tired. "Someone has to." The mimic lunged. Ellis turned and ran the other way, across the collapsing catwalk, the mimic instantly on him, the Leviathan moving beneath, the water rising in violent waves. I screamed his name. He didn't look back. His voice carried across the sector one final time. "If you see X00, don't listen." The catwalk split beneath him. The mimic leapt. The ocean erupted, black water swallowing them both. For one terrible second, I saw him suspended in the spray, the mimic wrapped around him, the Leviathan's jaws rising beneath them like a gate to something ancient. Then everything vanished. The water crashed back down. The mimic was gone. Ellis was gone. Only the alarms remained. I don't know how I reached the other side. Crawling, running, dragging myself over broken metal, the badge clenched so tightly the edges cut into my palm. I pushed through the service door into a narrow, dry, quiet corridor and let myself fall against the wall, unable to breathe, unable to think. Ellis was gone. Luis was gone. T01 was loose. X00 was awake. I forced myself to stand. A flashlight clicked on. The beam hit my face. For one wild second, I thought it was Mason. Then the figure stepped forward. Director Hahn. His suit was filthy, his hair disheveled, a gun held loose in one hand. Calm, controlled, waiting as if the world hadn't ended around him. He looked smaller than I remembered. And far more dangerous. Dr. Whitlock. His voice was steady, almost gentle. He raised the gun slightly, not enough to fire, enough to remind me that he could. "Give me Kenneth's files." Hope you enjoyed another dark story from Dead Air. But before you disappear into the dark, we have a question for you. Have you ever had someone become a little too obsessed with you? Maybe they always seemed to know where you were, even when you never told them. Maybe they remembered things about you that you don't remember telling them. Maybe you kept noticing the same person at work, at the store, outside your house. Or maybe someone's obsession didn't seem dangerous at first, until you tried to walk away. Tell us your story down in the comments, because obsession can look a lot like affection in the beginning. The constant messages, wanting to know where you are, wanting to know who you're with, wanting every second of your attention, until eventually you realize they don't just want to be part of your life, they want to own it. Who knows? Your experience might inspire a future tape here on VHS After Midnight. Until next time. If someone always seems to know where you are, maybe you should start wondering how.